Sarah Martinez walked through the glass doors of Blackstone Security Solutions for the first time, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished marble floor. The reception area screamed money and power with its towering ceiling, expensive artwork, and leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. She adjusted the strap of her simple canvas messenger bag and approached the receptionist's desk. "I'm here for the security consultant position," Sarah said quietly to the blonde woman behind the mahogany desk. The receptionist looked up from her computer screen with barely concealed annoyance, her perfectly manicured eyebrows rising as she took in Sarah's appearance. Sarah wore dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, and a black jacket that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried herself with an understated confidence that most people missed entirely. At 5 feet 6 inches, she wasn't particularly tall or imposing. Nothing about her screamed warrior or elite operator. "Name?" the receptionist asked with a sigh, as if Sarah was interrupting something important. "Sarah Martinez." The woman typed something into her computer and frowned. "I don't see you on the schedule. Are you sure you have the right day?" "The job posting said to come in today between 9 and 11 for interviews," Sarah replied patiently. "It's 10:30 now." "Well, I suppose I can see if Mr. Davidson has time," the receptionist said, picking up her phone with obvious reluctance. "There's someone here about the security position." "Yes, I know you weren't expecting anyone else." "Martinez." "Okay." She hung up and gestured toward a row of chairs. "Take a seat. Mr. Davidson will see you in a few minutes." Sarah sat down and watched as other candidates came and went. They were all men, all wearing expensive suits, and all carrying themselves with the kind of swagger that came from private military companies or high-end corporate security firms. She overheard fragments of conversations about previous deployments, certifications, and connections in the industry. "Did you see the new girl?" one of them said quietly to his companion as they waited. "Looks like she wandered in off the street. Maybe she's applying for the secretary position," the other replied with a chuckle. Sarah kept her expression neutral and continued reading a magazine from the coffee table. She had learned long ago that people's assumptions about her could be useful. Let them underestimate her. It had served her well in the past. 20 minutes later, a tall man in his 50s emerged from the elevator. He wore a tailored suit and had the bearing of someone used to being in charge. His hair was silver at the temples, and his handshake was firm when he introduced himself. "Marcus Davidson, Director of Operations," he said. "You must be Sarah Martinez. Come on up to my office." They rode the elevator to the 12th floor in silence. Davidson's office was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city skyline. Military memorabilia decorated the shelves, including photos of Davidson in Army Ranger's uniform from what looked like the early 90s. "So," Davidson said, settling behind his desk, "tell me about your background." Sarah had prepared for this moment carefully. "I spent 8 years in the military, mostly overseas deployments. Since leaving the service, I've been working private security for various clients. I'm looking for something more stable and challenging." Davidson nodded, but she could see he wasn't particularly impressed. "What branch? What was your MOS?" "Navy," Sarah replied. "I can't discuss specifics about my role due to classification issues, but I have all my discharge paperwork and references." Navy," Davidson said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, most of our work requires a different kind of expertise. We protect high-value targets, corporate executives, foreign dignitaries. It's not like standing watch on a ship." Sarah kept her voice level. "I understand the requirements of the position. Do you have experience with executive protection? Advanced work? Threat assessment?" Davidson's tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I have extensive experience in all those areas," Sarah said. Davidson leaned back in his chair. "Look, Sarah, I appreciate your service, but this position requires someone with specific qualifications. We're talking about protecting people whose lives are worth millions, maybe billions. One mistake could cost us everything." "What specific qualifications are you looking for?" Sarah asked. "Special operations background, preferably. Army Rangers, Green Berets, Delta Force, SEALs. People who've been in the thick of it, who know how to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. No offense, but most Navy positions don't provide that kind of training." Sarah nodded slowly. I see. We're also looking for someone who can fit in with our existing team. These guys have worked together for years. They're tight-knit, and they don't have time to babysit someone who might freeze up when things get hairy. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, but Sarah could tell Davidson had already made up his mind. He was going through the motions, probably worried about discrimination lawsuits if he cut things too short. We'll be in touch, Davidson said finally, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. As Sarah waited for the elevator, she overheard Davidson talking to someone on his phone. His office door was slightly open, and his voice carried into the hallway. Yeah, the Martinez woman just left. No, definitely not what we're looking for. I know, we have to interview everyone. But she's clearly out of her league here. Probably spent her Navy career filing paperwork or something. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah stepped inside with no change in expression. She had dealt with worse assumptions and more dangerous situations than a condescending interview. Downstairs in the lobby, 3 men in expensive suits were waiting for their own interviews. They looked up as Sarah approached, and she could see the mixture of curiosity and amusement in their eyes. How'd it go? One of them asked with mock concern. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from serious gym time. His business card, visible in his jacket pocket, indicated he worked for a major private military contractor. Fine, Sarah replied simply. Davidson can be pretty tough, another one said. This man had marine tattoos visible on his forearms and the confident air of someone who had never been told he couldn't do something. Hope he wasn't too hard on you. Not at all, Sarah said. The third man, older than the others with graying hair and expensive watch, smiled condescendingly. What's your background, if you don't mind me asking? We're all wondering what brought you here. Military, Sarah said. Which branch? What unit? The Marine pressed. Navy. Ah, the first man said, exchanging glances with his companions. Well, good luck with whatever you end up doing. Sarah could hear them talking as she walked toward the exit. Navy, one said with a laugh. Probably a yeoman or something. Did you see how quiet she was? This job requires someone who can take charge, make decisions. She seems like she'd hide behind the first available cover. Davidson will eat her alive if she somehow gets past the first round. Sarah pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto the busy sidewalk. The autumn air was crisp, and the lunch crowd was starting to emerge from office buildings. She walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop where she had arranged to meet someone. The coffee shop was tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore, the kind of place that survived on neighborhood regulars rather than foot traffic. Sarah ordered a black coffee and found a corner table where she could watch the entrance. 5 minutes later, a woman in her 40s entered the shop. She had short brown hair, sharp eyes, and moved with the efficient grace of someone who had spent years in uniform. Amanda Chun had been Sarah's handler during her final 2 years of active duty, and they had maintained contact since Sarah's discharge. How did it go? Amanda asked, sliding into the opposite chair. About what we expected, Sarah replied. They're not interested in anyone without the right pedigree. And, by right pedigree, they mean male with the right special operations background. Pretty much. Amanda stirred her coffee thoughtfully. You know, there might be another way to approach this. I'm listening. I've been keeping tabs on Blackstone since we discussed this opportunity. They're good at what they do, but they're also arrogant. They've turned down several qualified candidates over the past year because those candidates didn't fit their predetermined mold. What are you thinking? Their current contract is protecting Elena Vasquez, the tech billionaire. She's been receiving serious threats, and there's intelligence suggesting a real attempt might be made in the next few weeks. Sarah knew about Elena Vasquez. The 38-year-old had built her software company from nothing into a global empire worth $40 billion. She was also outspoken about women's rights, corporate responsibility, and political reform, which had earned her powerful enemies. Blackstone has been protecting her for 6 months, Amanda continued. But their methods are outdated. They're using a traditional executive protection model that worked great 20 years ago. Heavy security presence, obvious bodyguards, predictable routes, and patterns. That approach makes sense for some clients, Sarah said. Not for someone like Vasquez. She's not a politician or foreign dignitary. She's a working CEO who built her company on being accessible, and innovative. The heavy-handed approach is interfering with her ability to do her job. Amanda pulled out her phone and showed Sarah several photos. These were taken last week outside Vasquez's office building. See how obvious the security is? Anyone planning an attack can count the guards, identify the vehicles, predict the routes. Sarah studied the images. They're making themselves the target instead of blending into the environment. Exactly. And there's something else. Vasquez has requested a female security specialist multiple times. She does a lot of work with women's organizations, speaks at events for female entrepreneurs. Having an all-male security team sends the wrong message. Blackstone refused. Davidson claims they don't have any qualified female operatives. Says women aren't suited for high-level executive protection. Sarah set down her coffee cup. How do you know all this? Vasquez's assistant reached out to some contacts in the federal law enforcement community. They're looking for alternatives to Blackstone, but they're locked into a contract for another 4 months. So what's the plan? Amanda leaned forward. There's going to be a situation in the next week or two. Nothing dangerous, but something that will test Blackstone's response protocols. When they fail to handle it properly, Vasquez will have grounds to demand changes to her security arrangement. What kind of situation? A fake threat that will expose the weaknesses in their current approach. When they fumble it, you'll be in position to demonstrate how it should have been handled. Sarah considered this. It was risky, but it might be the only way to prove her capabilities to people who had already decided she wasn't qualified. I'm not asking you to decide right now, Amanda said. Just think about it. You're one of the best operators I've ever worked with, and you're wasting your talents because people can't see past their assumptions. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Sarah's mind was already working through the possibilities, analyzing the risks and potential outcomes. She had spent years proving herself in situations where failure meant death, not just embarrassment. As they prepared to leave, Amanda handed Sarah a business card. Elena Vasquez is speaking at a women's leadership conference tomorrow night. Downtown Marriott, 7 o'clock. If you're interested in seeing their current security setup firsthand, it might be educational. Sarah pocketed the card. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Just remember, Sarah, you didn't spend 8 years becoming one of the most elite operators in the military just to let some corporate security director decide you're not good enough. They parted ways outside the coffee shop. Sarah walked back toward the subway, her mind churning through everything Amanda had told her. The logical part of her brain said to find another job, something that didn't require proving herself to people who had already made up their minds. But another part of her, the part that had carried her through years of impossible missions and deadly situations, was tired of being underestimated. Maybe it was time to show Davidson and his team what they had missed. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment reviewing everything she knew about Blackstone Security Solutions. Their team was competent but predictable, their methods effective but outdated. They were protecting Elena Vasquez the same way they would protect a foreign minister or corporate executive from the 1990s. The world had changed since then. Threats were more sophisticated. Attackers more. The downtown Marriott buzzed with activity as Sarah approached the main entrance at 6:45 the next evening. She wore a simple black dress, low heels, and carried a small purse that contained items most conference attendees wouldn't think to bring. Her hair was styled differently than the day before, and she moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who belonged there. The Women's Leadership Conference had drawn nearly 300 attendees, including business executives, entrepreneurs, and aspiring leaders from across the region. Sarah had registered online that morning using credentials that would pass casual scrutiny, but wouldn't draw attention to her real background. As she entered the lobby, Sarah immediately spotted the Blackstone security team. They were exactly as obvious as Amanda had suggested. 3 men in dark suits positioned themselves near the elevators, by the registration desk, and at the entrance to the ballroom where the event would take place. Their earpieces were visible, their stance was unmistakably military, and they swept the room with the systematic attention of people looking for threats. Sarah recognized 2 of them from the previous day. The tall, broad-shouldered man from the lobby was positioned near the elevators, his eyes constantly moving as he scanned faces and assessed potential problems. The former Marine stood by the registration table, his muscular build evident even under his expensive suit. Elena Vasquez hadn't arrived yet, but her security team was already establishing a perimeter. Their approach was textbook executive protection, the kind taught in expensive courses to former military personnel transitioning to private security. It was also completely wrong for this environment. Sarah registered for the conference and received her name badge, then moved through the crowd toward the ballroom. She listened to conversations, observed the other attendees, and noted the venue's layout. Emergency exits, sight lines, potential hiding spots, and crowd flow patterns all registered automatically in her mind. The third member of the Blackstone team was inside the ballroom, positioned near the stage where Vasquez would be speaking. He was older than the others, probably in his early 40s, with the bearing of someone who had held leadership positions in the military. Sarah recognized the type immediately, a competent operator who had learned his skills in environments very different from this one. At 7:15, Elena Vasquez arrived through the hotel's main entrance. Sarah watched from across the lobby as the security team smoothly shifted into escort formation. Vasquez was smaller than Sarah had expected, perhaps 5 feet 4 inches, with auburn hair and the kind of energy that drew attention even in a crowded room. The problem became apparent immediately. The security team's formation was designed for hostile environments where threats came from crowds or distant shooters. 3 large men in dark suits surrounding a petite woman in a conference setting made everyone uncomfortable. Conversations stopped as they passed, people moved out of the way, and the entire atmosphere shifted from welcoming to tense. Sarah followed at a distance as they moved toward the ballroom. She could see Vasquez trying to stop and talk to people, but her security team kept her moving according to their timeline rather than allowing her to interact naturally. It was exactly the kind of heavy-handed approach that interfered with a client's ability to do their job effectively. Inside the ballroom, the situation got worse. The security team positioned themselves in locations that gave them good sight lines, but made everyone else nervous. The former Marine stood directly behind the head table, looming over the event organizers. His colleague remained by the main entrance, checking everyone who entered against some kind of list. The third man stationed himself near the stage, his attention focused on the crowd rather than blending in with the attendees. Sarah found a seat in the middle section, close enough to observe, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. She had chosen her position carefully, with clear views of all exits and potential problems areas. The conference began with introductory remarks from the organizers, followed by a panel discussion about women in technology. Sarah listened with genuine interest while maintaining her awareness of the security situation. The Blackstone team was competent but predictable, following protocols that assumed the worst while hoping for the best. When Elena Vasquez took the stage at 8:30, the dynamic shifted again. She was an engaging speaker, comfortable with the audience, and passionate about her subject. But Sarah could see how the security presence affected the interaction. People in the front rows kept glancing at the guards, and several attendees had moved to seats farther from the stage. Vasquez was discussing the challenges of building a tech company as a woman when Sarah noticed something the security team had missed. A man in the back row was taking photographs with a telephoto lens, but he wasn't focused on the speaker. He was systematically documenting the security arrangements, the guard positions, and the room layout. Sarah studied him carefully. He was in his 30s, wearing a hotel employee uniform that looked authentic but didn't quite fit properly. His movements were too focused, too professional for someone taking casual pictures. Most importantly, none of the Blackstone team had noticed him. She considered her options. Walking over to alert the security team would blow her cover and probably result in an embarrassing confrontation if she was wrong. But if she was right, they were missing a serious reconnaissance effort happening right under their noses. Sarah decided to test her theory. She stood up and walked toward the back of the room, as if heading to the restroom. As she passed the photographer's row, she deliberately stumbled and dropped her purse. The contents spilled across the floor, creating a minor commotion that would naturally draw attention. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Sarah said, kneeling to gather her things. The photographer instinctively lowered his camera and moved to help, giving her a clear look at his equipment and his reaction to the interruption. His camera was expensive, professional grade, with settings configured for surveillance rather than event photography. More importantly, His reaction was wrong. A legitimate hotel employee or casual photographer would have been helpful and unconcerned. This man was annoyed by the interruption and immediately began looking for security personnel, as if worried about being discovered. "No problem," he said quietly, his accent suggesting Eastern European origins. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, thank you," Sarah replied, making note of his hands, calloused in specific patterns that suggested military training, with a faded scar on his left wrist that looked like a knife wound. Definitely not hotel staff. Sarah returned to her seat with confirmation of what she had suspected. Someone was conducting surveillance on Elena Vasquez's security arrangements, and the people paid to protect her had completely missed it. The question was what to do about it. She could approach the Blackstone team directly, but they would probably dismiss her concerns or demand explanations she couldn't give without revealing her own background. She could contact hotel security, but they would likely defer to the professional protection team already in place. Or she could handle it herself. Sarah waited until Vasquez was halfway through her presentation, then quietly left the ballroom. She used her phone to take pictures of the suspicious man from different angles, documenting his position and equipment. Then, she made her way to the hotel's service corridors. Years of operating in hostile territory had taught Sarah how to navigate buildings most people never noticed. Every hotel had service hallways, maintenance rooms, and staff areas that provided access to the main spaces without being seen. She found what she was looking for on the second floor, a security office with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the hotel. The security guard on duty was middle-aged and looked bored by his routine assignment. Sarah approached him with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Excuse me," she said, showing him one of the photos on her phone. "I'm with conference security, and we need to verify the credentials of this man. He's been taking photographs of our speakers without permission." The guard looked at the photo, then checked his monitors until he found the camera angle covering the ballroom. "Yeah, I can see him there. You said he doesn't have permission." "That's correct. Could you contact your supervisor? We need him removed from the event immediately." The guard picked up his radio and called for backup. Within minutes, 2 hotel security officers were on their way to the ballroom. Sarah thanked the guard and left before they arrived, returning to her seat just as Elena Vasquez was concluding her presentation. She watched as the hotel security team approached the photographer. There was a brief conversation, some examination of credentials that apparently didn't satisfy them, and then a very quiet escort toward the exit. The entire interaction took less than 3 minutes, and most of the audience never noticed anything had happened. The Blackstone team, however, had noticed something was wrong. Sarah could see them communicating through their earpieces, trying to understand what had just occurred. The former Marine by the entrance was speaking urgently into his radio, while his colleague near the stage scanned the crowd for threats they might have missed. Elena Vasquez finished her speech to enthusiastic applause and began taking questions from the audience. The security team maintained their positions, but Sarah could sense their heightened alertness. They knew something had happened but didn't understand what or how they had missed it. During the question and answer session, Sarah observed how Vasquez interacted with her audience. She was warm and engaging, clearly comfortable in this environment. But the security presence continued to create artificial barriers between the speaker and her audience. Several people who raised their hands to ask questions seemed intimidated by the guard's attention. The event concluded at 9:30 with a reception in an adjacent room. Sarah watched as the Blackstone team smoothly transitioned their client from one space to another, maintaining their protective formation while allowing controlled interaction with attendees. Sarah mingled with the crowd during the reception, listening to conversations, and observing the ongoing security operation. The team's competence was evident in their coordination and communication, but their approach remained fundamentally flawed for this environment. "Excuse me," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see Elena Vasquez approaching with a warm smile. "I don't think we've been introduced." "I'm Elena." Sarah accepted the offered handshake. "Sarah Martinez. Thank you for such an inspiring presentation. What line of work are you in, Sarah?" "Security consulting," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully. Elena's expression brightened with interest. "Really? What kind of security? Risk assessment, threat evaluation, that sort of thing. How fascinating. You know, I've been thinking a lot about security lately. The traditional approaches seem so. Elena paused, glancing toward where her bodyguards were positioned around the room. Well, let's say they're not always compatible with the kind of work I do. Before Sarah could respond, the broad-shouldered Blackstone operative appeared at Elena's side. Ms. Vasquez, we should be moving soon. Your schedule has you leaving at 10. Elena glanced at her watch. It's only 9:45, Derek. I'm enjoying the conversation. Ma'am, the longer we stay in any location, the higher the risk profile becomes. Derek replied in a tone that suggested this was an ongoing disagreement. Sarah watched the interaction with interest. Derek was following standard executive protection protocols, but he was also preventing his client from doing her job effectively. A tech CEO needed to network, build relationships, and maintain visibility in her industry. Rushing her through every interaction undermined her professional effectiveness. Derek, this is Sarah Martinez. She works in security consulting, Elena said, either unaware of or choosing to ignore the tension in Derek's posture. Derek's assessment of Sarah was quick and dismissive. Nice to meet you, he said without meaning it, then turned back to Elena. Ma'am, we really should go. In a few minutes, Elena said firmly. She turned back to Sarah. I'd love to continue our conversation sometime. Do you have a card? Sarah handed her a business card with her consulting credentials. I'd be happy to discuss security strategies with you anytime. Derek was clearly unhappy with this exchange, but he couldn't force his client to leave without causing a scene. He stepped back slightly, but remained close enough to intervene if necessary. You know, Elena said, lowering her voice, I've been thinking that my security arrangements might need some updating. The world has changed, but the approaches haven't. Sarah nodded. Effective security should be invisible when possible, obvious only when necessary. Exactly. Elena's eyes lit up. That's exactly what I've been trying to explain to everyone. Derek's patience finally ran out. Ms. Vasquez, I'm sorry, but we have strict protocols about timeline adherence. If we don't leave now, we'll need to change our entire route plan. Elena sighed. Fine, Derek. We'll go. She turned back to Sarah. Please call me. I think we have a lot to discuss. Sarah watched as the Blackstone team efficiently moved their client toward the exit. Their execution was flawless, their professionalism evident. But Elena's frustration was equally clear. She was being protected by people who didn't understand her needs or her work environment. As the reception wound down, Sarah made her way to the lobby and then out to the street. The October air was crisp, and the city's evening energy was building toward the weekend. She walked several blocks before calling Amanda. How did it go? Amanda asked. Interesting, Sarah replied. Their security is competent, but completely wrong for the client and environment. Did anything happen? Sarah told her about the photographer and how the security team had missed the surveillance operation entirely. They're focused on traditional threats, but missing the modern ones. That's exactly what we expected. Are you ready to move forward? Sarah considered everything she had observed. Elena Vasquez needed protection, but she also needed to be able to do her job. The current arrangement was failing on both counts, creating security gaps while interfering with her professional effectiveness. Yes, Sarah said finally. I'm ready. Good. I'll be in touch tomorrow with the details. Sarah walked home through the quiet streets, her mind already working through the 3 days later. Sarah sat in a rented Honda Civic across the street from Elena Vasquez's office building, watching the morning security routine unfold with professional interest. She had been observing Blackstone's protection protocols for 48 hours, documenting their patterns and identifying the weaknesses Amanda had mentioned. The patterns were remarkably consistent. Elena arrived each morning between 7:30 and 8 o'clock in an armored Mercedes with 2 security vehicles. The convoy always used the same route from her downtown penthouse, always parked in the same secured area of the underground garage, and always followed the same elevator protocols to reach the executive floor. Derek, the broad-shouldered team leader, maintained overwatch from the lobby while his colleagues escorted Elena to her office. They swept the building every morning, checked with building security, and established communication protocols with local law enforcement. Everything was textbook perfect and completely predictable. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Package delivered to building management. You're clear to proceed. Sarah checked her watch. 8:45. Elena would be in her first meeting of the day, and the Blackstone team would be settling into their routine positions. It was time to test their response protocols. Sarah walked into the office building's main lobby wearing different clothes than she had used for surveillance. Today she looked like a delivery person, complete with a uniform shirt, clipboard, and small package that would pass casual inspection. Her hair was tucked under a baseball cap, and she moved with the hurried efficiency of someone trying to complete multiple stops. The building's security desk was staffed by 2 guards who checked identification and managed visitor access. They were accustomed to delivery personnel and barely looked up as Sarah approached. Package for Elena Vasquez, Sarah said, showing them an official-looking shipping label. I need to deliver this personally. You'll have to leave it here. One of the guards replied automatically. Ms. Vasquez doesn't accept direct deliveries. This requires a signature, Sarah said, showing them a delivery form with official-looking letterhead. Legal documents from her attorney's office. The guards exchanged glances. They dealt with this situation regularly, caught between delivery requirements and security protocols. Sarah watched as they made the predictable choice. I'll call upstairs, the first guard said, picking up his phone. Sarah waited patiently while the guard spoke to someone on Elena's floor. She could hear half of the conversation, which went exactly as Amanda had predicted. The assistant wasn't expecting any legal documents, but the attorney's office was legitimate, and the paperwork looked authentic. They'll send someone down to get it, the guard told Sarah. I'm sorry, but I need Ms. Vasquez's personal signature, Sarah replied, reading from her delivery form. Insurance requirements. If she can't sign personally, I have to return it to the sender, and they'll have to send a lawyer. This created the exact dilemma Amanda had designed. Elena had an important court filing due that afternoon, and any delay in legal documents could cause serious problems. The guards called upstairs again, and Sarah could hear the frustration in the assistant's voice as she tried to balance security requirements with business necessity. Okay, the guard said finally. Derek will escort you upstairs. Sarah nodded and waited while they called Derek down from the executive floor. She used the time to observe the lobby layout, emergency exits, and security camera positions. Everything she saw confirmed her assessment that Blackstone was using outdated protocols for a modern threat environment. Derek appeared from the elevator 5 minutes later, his expression showing mild irritation at being pulled away from his primary duties. He recognized Sarah from their brief introduction at the conference, but showed no sign of suspicion. Legal delivery, the guard explained, handing Derek the visitor badge they had prepared. Derek examined the package and shipping documents. What kind of legal documents? I just deliver them, Sarah said with the tired voice of someone who answered the same questions dozens of times every day. Something about a patent filing, I think. Derek led her to the elevator, maintaining the professional distance appropriate for someone escorting a service worker. He was competent and alert, but his attention was focused on external threats rather than the person standing next to him. Busy morning? Sarah asked as they rode up to the 23rd floor. Always, Derek replied without elaboration. The executive floor was exactly what Sarah had expected from her research. Expensive furniture, impressive artwork, and the kind of quiet efficiency that came from serious money. Derek led her past several offices to Elena's corner suite, where her assistant was waiting with obvious anxiety about the disrupted schedule. Ms. Vasquez is in a conference call, the assistant said. She can't be interrupted. Derek examined the delivery documents again. How long will this take? Just a signature, Sarah said. 30 seconds. Elena's voice could be heard through the partially open door to her office. She was discussing quarterly projections with someone, her tone professional and engaged. Derek weighed his options, clearly uncomfortable with interrupting his client, but aware that legal deadlines couldn't be ignored. I'll check with her, he said finally, knocking on the office door. Sarah waited in the reception area while Derek spoke quietly with Elena. The assistant continued to look stressed about the schedule disruption, checking her computer and making notes about meetings that would need to be delayed. She'll see you now, Derek said, returning with Elena close behind him. Elena looked exactly as she had at the conference, energetic and focused despite the early hour. She approached Sarah with a friendly smile and extended her hand. I'm sorry for the confusion, Elena said. I wasn't expecting anything from the attorney's office this morning. Sarah handed her the package and clipboard. I just need your signature here. Elena signed without reading the documents, trusting that her legal team had sent something important. It was exactly the kind of behavior that created security vulnerabilities, and exactly what Sarah had counted on. There you go, Elena said, handing back the clipboard. She glanced at Sarah more carefully, and something flickered in her eyes. Have we met before? You look familiar. I don't think so, Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. Derek was checking his watch, obviously wanting to get Elena back to her schedule. Are we finished here? Yes, Sarah said, packing up her delivery materials. Thank you for your time. As Derek escorted Sarah back to the elevator, she mentally noted everything she had observed. The floor layout, office locations, staff positions, and, most importantly, the security team's response to an unexpected situation. They had handled it competently but, predictably, following protocols that prioritized efficiency over thorough verification. Back in the lobby, Sarah returned her visitor badge and left the building through the main entrance. She walked 2 blocks before calling Amanda from a secure phone. Phase 1 complete, Sarah said. They handled it exactly as predicted. Any problems? None. Elena almost recognized me from the conference, but Derek was more concerned about his schedule than investigating further. Good. Are you ready for Phase 2? Sarah checked her watch. Elena would be leaving for lunch in approximately 4 hours, following the same route she used every Tuesday. The Blackstone team would be prepared for normal threats, but not for what Sarah had planned. I'm ready. Remember, the objective is to demonstrate their vulnerability without actually putting anyone in danger. Understood. Sarah spent the next 3 hours conducting final reconnaissance of Elena's lunch route. The restaurant was an upscale Italian place 6 blocks from the office, one that Elena visited regularly for business meetings. The route was predictable, the destination was known, and the security arrangements followed the same pattern every week. At 11:45, Sarah positioned herself in a coffee shop across from the restaurant with a clear view of the street. She wore different clothes again, this time looking like a business professional meeting a colleague for lunch. Her appearance was forgettable, professional, and completely unremarkable. Elena's convoy arrived at exactly 12:15, right on schedule. The armored Mercedes pulled up to the restaurant's entrance while the security vehicles maintained overwatch positions. Derek and his team executed a flawless close protection movement, scanning for threats while escorting their client from the vehicle to the building. Sarah waited until Elena was inside, and the security team had established their lunch positions. Then, she made her move. The plan was simple but effective. Sarah approached the restaurant from the rear alley, using service entrances and delivery areas that the security team hadn't adequately covered. She had identified this vulnerability during her earlier reconnaissance, noting that Blackstone focused their attention on street-level threats while ignoring the possibility of someone gaining access through the building's service areas. Sarah entered through the kitchen delivery entrance, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Restaurant staff were too busy with lunch preparation to question her presence, and her professional appearance suggested she might be a health inspector, corporate visitor, or other legitimate business contact. She made her way through the kitchen to the dining room, where Elena was seated at a corner table with 2 business associates. Derek was positioned near the main entrance, while his colleagues maintained exterior overwatch. None of them had visual contact with the kitchen or service areas. Sarah approached Elena's table from the blind spot the security team had created. She could have been carrying anything, approaching for any purpose, and none of Elena's protectors would have known until it was too late. "Excuse me, Ms. Vasquez," Sarah said quietly, appearing at Elena's elbow with a small envelope. "This was delivered to your office, but they said it was urgent." Elena looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting to be approached during her private lunch. Her lunch companions also seemed puzzled by the interruption. "I'm sorry," Elena said, "but I don't think you should be here. My security team." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, placing the envelope on the table. "I was told to deliver this personally." That was when Derek realized something was wrong. He could see Elena talking to someone who shouldn't have been able to reach her, someone who had somehow bypassed all of their security measures. He began moving toward the table, while speaking urgently into his earpiece. Sarah stepped back from the table with her hands visible and empty. My apologies for the interruption. Have a pleasant lunch. Derek reached the table just as Sarah was turning to leave. Ma'am, are you all right? I'm fine, Elena said, looking confused by the situation. This woman just delivered something to me. Derek's training kicked in immediately. An unknown person had gained unauthorized access to his client, which meant their security perimeter had been compromised. He spoke rapidly into his radio while maintaining visual contact with Sarah. We need to leave, Derek told Elena. Now. But, we just ordered. One of Elena's lunch companions protested. Ma'am, someone breached our security. We need to evacuate immediately. Sarah could hear the controlled urgency in Derek's voice as he coordinated with his team. They were handling the situation professionally, but they were also confirming the massive vulnerability she had just exposed. Elena opened the envelope while Derek organized their departure. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in simple block letters. Your security team is excellent, but the world has changed. Modern threats require modern solutions. Call Sarah Martinez. Elena looked up, but Sarah had already disappeared back toward the kitchen. The security team would spend the next several minutes searching the restaurant and questioning staff, but they wouldn't find her. She had exited the same way she had entered, using routes they hadn't covered. By the time Derek's team completed their security sweep, Sarah was 3 blocks away, observing their response from a safe distance. She watched as they loaded Elena into the armored Mercedes and departed using a different route than usual. Their reaction was competent and professional, but it was also an admission that their previous arrangements had been inadequate. Sarah's phone rang as Elena's convoy disappeared around a corner. Did you see the news? Amanda asked. What news? Check your phone. Local business channel just ran a story about a security breach at Elena Vasquez's lunch meeting. Someone got past her bodyguards and delivered a mysterious message. Sarah pulled up the news story on her phone. The reporter was interviewing witnesses outside the restaurant, all of whom confirmed that an unidentified woman had somehow bypassed professional security to approach the tech billionaire during a private lunch meeting. The security company is refusing to comment, the reporter continued, but sources close to MS. Vasquez confirmed that she was unharmed and that the incident is under investigation. Phase 2 complete, Sarah told Amanda. Any complications? Elena Vasquez's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a converted warehouse in the city's arts district, a space that reflected both her wealth and her unconventional approach to business. Sarah arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, having spent the afternoon researching the building's security features and planning multiple exit routes. The elevator required a special key card to access the penthouse level, a card that Elena had arranged to be waiting for Sarah at the security desk. The building's doorman was professional but relaxed, suggesting that Elena's visitors were typically business associates rather than security threats. Elena answered the door herself, wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she looked younger and more approachable than she had in her corporate environment. Sarah Martinez, Elena said, studying her carefully. The woman who somehow walked past 3 professional bodyguards to deliver a message during lunch. Good evening, Ms. Vasquez. Elena, please. Come in. The penthouse was spectacular, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. The decor was modern but warm, with comfortable furniture and artwork that suggested personal taste rather than professional decoration. Sarah noted the layout automatically, identifying potential cover positions and defensive choke points. Can I offer you something to drink? Elena asked. Coffee, wine, water? Water would be fine. Elena led her to a seating area overlooking the city skyline. The space was clearly designed for informal business meetings, with comfortable chairs arranged to encourage conversation. She poured water from an expensive pitcher and settled into the chair across from Sarah. So, Elena said, let's talk about what happened today. What would you like to know? Let's start with how you managed to bypass my security team. Derek has been with me for 2 years, and he's never had a breach like that. Sarah considered how much to reveal. Your team is competent and professional, but They're using traditional executive protection protocols in a modern threat environment, meaning they're focused on preventing direct attacks from obvious threats. Large men with weapons, suspicious vehicles, known problem individuals. But modern threats are often more subtle. Elena leaned forward with interest. Give me an example. The photographer at your conference speech 3 nights ago. Elena blinked in surprise. What photographer? Back row, left side, wearing a hotel employee uniform that didn't fit properly. He was documenting your security arrangements with professional-grade equipment. Your team never noticed him. How do you know about that? Because I had hotel security remove him. Elena stared at Sarah for a long moment. You were at the conference? Yes. And you spotted a threat my professional security team missed? Yes. Elena stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. Derek mentioned that someone had been removed from the venue, but he said it was handled by hotel security. He never connected it to a potential threat, because it wasn't obvious enough to fit his threat assessment model. But you recognized it immediately? I recognized the behavior pattern, yes. Elena turned back to face Sarah. What's your background? Sarah had prepared for this question carefully. 8 years military, specialized training in threat assessment, and close protection. What kind of specialized training? The kind that's still classified. Elena raised an eyebrow. Special operations? Sarah nodded. Which unit? I can't discuss that. Elena returned to her chair, studying Sarah with new intensity. Let me ask you something else. How did you get past my security today? Your team focuses on street-level threats and main entrances. They don't adequately cover service areas, delivery routes, or approaches that don't fit traditional attack profiles. So you came through the kitchen? Among other things. What other things? Sarah hesitated. Explaining her full infiltration would reveal capabilities that might make Elena uncomfortable. I observed your security patterns for several days, identified the vulnerabilities, and developed an approach that exploited those weaknesses. You've been watching me for several days? Watching your security arrangements, yes. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Why? Because someone needs to protect you properly, and the current arrangements aren't adequate. Derek and his team have kept me safe for 2 years. They've kept you safe from traditional threats, Sarah corrected. But the world has changed. Modern attackers use different methods, different approaches. Social engineering, technical infiltration, psychological manipulation. Your current security is designed for threats from the 1990s. Elena stood again and walked to a different window. The threats I receive aren't exactly traditional. What kind of threats? Death threats from religious extremists because I support women's reproductive rights. Kidnapping threats from foreign governments because I won't sell them surveillance technology. Corporate espionage attempts because my company is worth more than some country's GDP. Sarah listened carefully. These were exactly the kinds of modern threats that required adaptive security approaches. And that's just what I know about, Elena continued. According to my lawyers, there are probably dozens of other threats I never hear about. What does Derek recommend? More guards, heavier weapons, armored vehicles for everything. He wants me to live like I'm in a war zone. But that interferes with your work. Exactly. Elena turned back to Sarah. I built my company by being accessible, by connecting with people, by staying involved in the details. I can't do that if I'm surrounded by bodyguards who treat every business meeting like a potential ambush. Sarah nodded. Effective security should enable your lifestyle, not restrict it. That's exactly what I've been trying to explain to everyone. Elena's voice carried the frustration of someone who had been having the same argument for months. But everyone I talk to gives me the same answer. More guards, more guns, more restrictions. Because that's the only approach they know. So what's your approach? Sarah had been preparing for this question since her conversation with Amanda. Adaptive security. Threat-specific protocols. Invisible protection when possible. Overwhelming force when necessary. What does that look like practically? Instead of obvious bodyguards who make everyone nervous, you have protection specialists who blend into your business environment. Instead of predictable routes and schedules, you have flexible security that adapts to changing threats. Instead of restrictions on your activities, you have enhanced security capabilities that allow you to do more safely. Elena returned to her chair, her expression thoughtful. Can you give me a specific example? Today's lunch meeting. Traditional approach is 3 obvious guards, armored vehicles, predictable timing, and a perimeter that doesn't actually cover all the approaches. Modern approach would be advanced reconnaissance, flexible route planning, invisible overwatch, and real-time threat assessment. And the result would be, you have lunch with your business associates without feeling like you're under siege, but you're actually safer because the security is designed for real threats rather than obvious ones. Elena was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the city lights. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and controlled. I have a board meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Quarterly review, very important investors, extremely confidential information. Derek wants to use our standard protocol, which means obvious security that makes everyone uncomfortable and reminds everyone that I'm a target. Sarah waited. What would your approach be? I need to know more about the specific circumstances. Location, attendees, agenda, current threat level. It's at our corporate headquarters, 22nd floor conference room. 12 board members, 6 external investors, my executive team. We'll be discussing acquisition targets and revenue projections that could affect stock prices. Duration, 3 hours, probably 4. Building security, standard corporate. Metal detectors in the lobby, security guards, key card access to executive floors. Sarah thought through the scenario quickly. I'd recommend minimal visible security, maximum information security, and real-time threat monitoring. Meaning, instead of guards in the conference room making everyone nervous, you have technical surveillance detecting any electronic eavesdropping attempts. Instead of obvious protection, you have someone positioned to respond to real threats. Instead of disrupting the meeting with security protocols, you have invisible protection that doesn't interfere with business. Elena leaned forward. Could you do that? Yes. Tomorrow. If you want me to. Elena stood and walked to a desk in the corner of the room. She opened a laptop and began typing rapidly. I'm sending Derek an email telling him to use minimal security tomorrow. 1 guard in the lobby, standard building protocols, no visible protection in the conference room. She finished typing and turned back to Sarah. Now convince me you can keep me safe without Derek knowing you're there. Sarah considered the challenge carefully. Protecting Elena during a board meeting without the knowledge or cooperation of her existing security team would be difficult, but not impossible. The key would be maintaining invisibility while ensuring comprehensive coverage. I'll need building plans, attendee lists, and your schedule for the rest of the week. Done. What else? Access to your office building during off hours tonight. Elena typed something else on her laptop. I'm sending you building access codes and elevator overrides. My assistant will have everything else ready by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And if something goes wrong? You mean if there's an actual threat? Yes. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, I guess I'll find out whether you're as good as you claim to be. Sarah nodded. One more thing. If I do this tomorrow, and if it goes well, what happens next? You mean long-term? I mean, are you looking for a replacement for Derek? Or are you looking for someone to supplement his team? Elena walked back to the windows, her reflection visible in the darkened glass. Derek is a good man and a competent professional. But he's not what I need for the next phase of my life. Which is, my company is about to go public with some revolutionary technology that could change how people interact with information systems. The IPO will probably make me one of the 10 wealthiest people in the world. That's going to create security challenges that Derek's traditional approach can't handle. Sarah understood. Elena wasn't just looking for better protection. She was looking for security capabilities that could evolve with her changing circumstances. So tomorrow is an audition? Tomorrow is a test, Elena replied. If you can keep me safe during the most important business meeting of my career without anyone knowing you're there, then we'll talk about a more permanent arrangement. Sarah stood to leave. I'll be there. I won't see you. That's the point. Elena smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived. Good luck, Sarah Martinez. Don't let me down. Sarah took the elevator back to the lobby, her mind already working through the challenge. Sarah arrived at Elena's office building at 5:30 the next morning, 3 hours before the first employees would begin arriving for work. The building access codes Elena had provided worked perfectly, allowing her to enter through a service entrance without triggering any security alerts. She had spent the previous night studying building blueprints, security camera locations, and ventilation systems. Her equipment bag contained surveillance devices, communication gear, and defensive tools that would be invisible to casual observation, but effective if needed. The 22nd floor was quiet and dark as Sarah made her way to the executive conference room where Elena's board meeting would take place. She used night vision equipment to navigate without turning on lights, documenting camera angles and potential hiding positions. The conference room was impressive, with a massive oval table that could seat 20 people and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. Sarah noted the sight lines, emergency exits, and potential security vulnerabilities. More importantly, she identified locations where she could position surveillance equipment and maintain overwatch without being detected. Sarah spent 2 hours installing microcameras in inconspicuous locations around the conference room. The devices were military-grade, invisible to casual inspection, and would provide her with complete visual coverage of the meeting. She also placed audio detection equipment that would alert her to any electronic surveillance attempts. By 7:30, Sarah had established a monitoring position in an unused office 3 doors down from the conference room. She could observe everyone entering and leaving the meeting area while maintaining communication with her surveillance network. Elena arrived at 8:15, following her normal morning routine. Sarah watched through her surveillance feeds as Elena reviewed documents, met with her executive team, and prepared for the day's crucial board meeting. Derek was nowhere to be seen, apparently following Elena's instructions to maintain minimal security presence. At 9 o'clock, Sarah's equipment detected the first electronic surveillance attempt. Someone was using sophisticated scanning equipment to probe the conference room for electromagnetic emissions, the kind of reconnaissance that preceded industrial espionage operations. Sarah tracked the signal to its source, a van parked across the street from Elena's building. Through high-powered optics, she could see technical equipment and 2 operators who were clearly conducting intelligence gathering rather than legitimate business. This was exactly the kind of modern threat that Derek's traditional security approach would miss entirely. The attempt was subtle, technical, and completely invisible to conventional protection methods. Sarah activated a jamming device that would prevent the surveillance team from gathering useful information while making their equipment malfunction in ways that looked like normal technical problems. The operators would spend hours trying to troubleshoot issues that Sarah was creating remotely. At 11 o'clock, board members began arriving for the afternoon meeting. Sarah monitored each arrival through building security cameras, cross-referencing faces against the attendee list Elena had provided. Everyone matched their expected profiles until the 12th person arrived. The man entering the building looked like all the other board members, expensive suit, confident bearing, and the kind of presence that suggested serious money. But something about his movement patterns triggered Sarah's threat assessment training. She ran his photograph through facial recognition software and got a hit that made her blood run cold. The man was Viktor Petrov, a Russian intelligence operative who specialized in corporate espionage and had been linked to several high-profile kidnapping attempts. Petrov was using documentation identifying him as James Morrison, a venture capital partner who was supposedly attending the meeting as a potential investor. The identity was sophisticated enough to pass normal background checks, but Sarah's military-grade database had more comprehensive information. Sarah faced a critical decision. She could alert Elena directly, but that would blow her cover and potentially trigger a confrontation in a crowded office building. She could call the authorities, but explaining how she had identified Petrov would raise questions about her surveillance activities. Instead, Sarah decided to handle the threat herself. She moved quickly through the building's service corridors, using access routes that avoided security cameras and populated areas. Her destination was the executive floor elevator bank, where she could intercept Petrov before he reached the conference room. Sarah positioned herself in a supply closet near the elevators, with clear sight lines to the corridor leading to Elena's conference room. She wore the kind of professional attire that would allow her to blend in with office workers while concealing the equipment she might need. At 2:50, 10 minutes before the board meeting was scheduled to begin, Petrov emerged from the elevator and walked confidently toward the conference room. Sarah waited until he passed her position, then stepped into the corridor behind him. "Excuse me," Sarah said quietly. "Mr. Morrison?" Petrov turned with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yes, I'm Sarah Martinez, Ms. Vasquez's security consultant. Could I speak with you privately for a moment? Petrov's expression didn't change, but Sarah could see him assessing her, trying to understand why Elena would have security personnel he hadn't been warned about. Of course, he said. Is there a problem? Sarah gestured toward an empty office. Just a routine verification. It will only take a minute. Petrov followed her into the office, maintaining his friendly demeanor while his eyes constantly moved, looking for threats or escape routes. Sarah closed the door behind them and turned to face him directly. Your documentation identifies you as James Morrison from Redstone Venture Capital, Sarah said calmly. That's correct. Except James Morrison is currently in London attending a conference on emerging technologies. He's been there for 3 days. Petrov's smile faded slightly. I think there's been some confusion. No confusion, Sarah replied. Viktor Petrov, GRU operative, specialized training in corporate espionage and asset extraction. You've been planning to kidnap Elena Vasquez during today's board meeting. Petrov abandoned his pretense instantly. His hand moved toward his jacket, but Sarah was already in motion. Years of combat training had taught her to read microexpressions and body language, and she had seen the decision to attack in his eyes before he started moving. Sarah's strike was precise and efficient. She disabled Petrov's weapon hand with a joint lock that sent his concealed pistol clattering across the floor, then applied a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds and made virtually no noise. Sarah quickly searched Petrov and found a sophisticated communications device, lock-picking tools, and chemical restraints that confirmed her assessment of his intentions. She also found detailed floor plans of Elena's building and photographs of Elena's normal security arrangements. Sarah used plastic restraints to secure Petrov, then activated a small transmitter that would summon federal law enforcement to the building. She had developed contacts in the intelligence community during her military service, and they would handle the situation discreetly. By 3 o'clock, Elena's board meeting was beginning as scheduled. Sarah had returned to her monitoring position and was watching through her surveillance network as 12 legitimate board members and 6 verified investors gathered around the conference table. Elena looked confident and prepared as she presented quarterly results and outlined her company's expansion plans. The meeting proceeded smoothly, with sophisticated discussions about market positioning, competitive advantages, and growth strategies. Sarah monitored the discussion while simultaneously coordinating with federal agents who were quietly removing Viktor Petrov from the building. The operation was handled so discreetly that none of Elena's employees or meeting attendees knew anything had happened. At 4:30, Sarah's surveillance equipment detected another electronic intrusion attempt, this one more sophisticated than the morning probe. Someone was using military-grade equipment to attempt real-time eavesdropping on Elena's board meeting. The signal was coming from inside the building. Sarah quickly traced the source to an office 2 floors below Elena's conference room. Someone had positioned professional surveillance equipment with direct line of sight to the meeting location, using sophisticated audio enhancement to capture conversations through the building structure. Sarah made her way to the source location using building schematics she had memorized during her overnight reconnaissance. The office was supposed to be unoccupied, but she could see equipment operating inside. Sarah picked the lock and entered the office silently. 2 men were operating surveillance gear while recording Elena's board meeting in real time. They were so focused on their equipment that they didn't notice Sarah until she spoke. Gentlemen, I'm afraid you're in violation of federal wiretapping statutes. Both men spun around in surprise. They were clearly professional operatives, but they had been caught completely off guard. Sarah already had her weapon drawn and was positioned to control the entire room. Hands where I can see them, Sarah ordered. Step away from the equipment. The men complied reluctantly, realizing they had been outmaneuvered by someone they hadn't known existed. Sarah quickly disabled their surveillance gear while keeping them under armed supervision. Corporate espionage, Sarah asked conversationally. We don't know what you're talking about, one of them replied. Industrial surveillance equipment, real-time recording of confidential business discussions, unauthorized building access. I'd say you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sarah had already called for additional federal support, and she could hear agents moving through the building. The two surveillance operatives would be processed through the same discrete channels that were handling Viktor Petrov. By 5:30, Elena's board meeting was concluding successfully. The investors had approved her expansion plans, the quarterly results had exceeded expectations, and preliminary discussions about the IPO had begun. Sarah packed up her surveillance equipment and prepared to leave the building the same way she had entered. The day's operations had been completely successful. Elena had conducted her meeting without any security disruptions, while Sarah had neutralized 3 separate threats that could have compromised sensitive business information or endangered Elena's safety. As Sarah was preparing to exit through the service corridors, her phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. Conference room, now. Sarah made her way back to the 22nd floor, where Elena was alone in the conference room, reviewing documents from the day's meeting. She looked up as Sarah entered. So, Elena said, how did I do? The meeting was very successful. That's not what I'm asking. Elena's expression was serious. I want to know what happened today that I didn't see. Sarah considered how much to reveal. There were 3 separate security incidents. All were handled without disrupting your meeting. What kind of incidents? Electronic surveillance, attempted infiltration, and a more serious threat that was neutralized before it could develop. Elena was quiet for a moment. The federal agents I saw in the lobby 20 minutes ago, part of the resolution process. And Derek never knew any of this was happening. Derek was following your instructions to maintain minimal security presence. He did exactly what you asked him to do. Elena stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. But you kept me safe anyway. Yes. Without anyone knowing you were here. Correct. Elena turned back to Sarah. I have a question for you. What's that? Are you interested in a permanent position? Sarah had been hoping for this moment since her first interview with Marcus Davidson at Blackstone Security. What kind of position? Head of personal security. Salary, benefits, and equity participation that reflects the importance of what you do. Complete authority over my protection protocols, with a budget to implement whatever security measures you think are necessary. What about Derek and his team? Derek is a good man, but he's not what I need anymore. I'll make sure he's transitioned to a position that uses his skills appropriately. Sarah nodded. What's your timeline? I'd like you to start immediately. Tomorrow, if possible. There are some things you should know about my background. Such as, Sarah took a deep breath. I wasn't just in the Navy. I was part of a very specialized unit that conducted operations most people don't know exist. Navy SEALs. Something like that. Elena smiled. I figured as much. You don't learn to do what you did today in regular military training. It means my methods might be different from what you're used to. After today, different is exactly what I want. Sarah extended her hand. When do I start? Elena shook it firmly. You already have. As Sarah left Elena's office building that evening, she reflected on everything that had happened over the past week. She had gone from being dismissed as unqualified by Marcus Davidson to being offered the exact position she had wanted all along. More importantly, she had proven to herself that her skills were not only relevant in the civilian world, they were essential for protecting people who faced modern, sophisticated threats. Her phone rang as she reached her car. How did it go? Amanda asked. Better than expected. Elena offered you the job? Yes. Are you going to take it? Sarah looked back at the building where Elena Vasquez was probably still working, preparing for the next phase of her company's growth, and the security challenges that would come with it. Yes, Sarah said. I'm going to take it. 3 weeks later, Marcus Davidson received a resignation letter from Derek and a termination notice for Blackstone Security's contract with Elena Vasquez. The letter cited evolving security requirements and strategic realignment of protection protocols. Davidson tried calling Elena directly, but was told that all security matters were now being handled by her new head of personal security. When he asked who had been hired for the position, the assistant checked her records and told him it was someone named Sarah Martinez. Davidson hung up the phone and stared at his office wall for a long moment. Then, he walked to his filing cabinet and pulled out the resume he had dismissed just a month earlier. Sarah Martinez, 8 years Navy, specialized training in threat assessment and close protection. He had turned down the most qualified candidate who had ever applied for a position with his company, and he hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Elena Vasquez's IPO 3 months later made her the eighth wealthiest person in the world and established her technology company as one of the most valuable corporations in history. The offering proceeded without security incidents, despite multiple attempts at corporate espionage and several credible threats against Elena's safety. Her security arrangements were handled by a team that seemed invisible until needed, led by a woman whose background remained classified, but whose effectiveness was evident to everyone who worked with Elena. Sarah Martinez had found her place in the civilian world, proving that the most dangerous mistake people could make was underestimating someone based on their assumptions rather than their capabilities. And Marcus Davidson learned that in the modern security industry, the biggest threat to success wasn't always the enemy you could see coming. Sometimes it was the opportunity you failed to recognize when it was standing right in front of you. Guess of the next day. She had approximately 18 hours to conduct reconnaissance, develop security protocols, and position herself to protect Elena Vasquez without being detected by her existing security team. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes mission she had trained for throughout her military career. The only difference was that failure wouldn't just mean a blown operation. It would mean the end of any chance to prove herself in the civilian security industry. As Sarah walked through the quiet streets toward her car, she mentally reviewed everything she would need to accomplish before tomorrow afternoon. Building reconnaissance, route planning, equipment procurement, and communication protocols all needed to be in place by dawn. She had asked for this chance to prove herself, and Elena Vasquez had given it to her. Now she had to deliver on the promises she had made, while working alone in hostile territory with no backup and no margin for error. It was going to be a very long night. None. Elena has my card and my message. Now we wait to see if she's smart enough to call. Sarah walked back toward her car, mentally reviewing everything that had happened. She had demonstrated that Blackstone's security arrangements were inadequate for modern threats. She had done so without putting anyone in actual danger, and she had given Elena Vasquez a clear path to finding better protection. The question now was whether Elena would recognize the message Sarah was sending. She was clearly intelligent enough to build a $40 billion company, but intelligence didn't always translate to understanding security vulnerabilities. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Elena Vasquez. We need to talk. Tonight, 7 p.m., address attached. Come alone." Sarah smiled as she read the message. Elena Vasquez was definitely smart enough to understand what had just happened. Now the real challenge would begin. Challenges ahead. She was about to take on a powerful security company, prove herself to a client who didn't know she existed, and demonstrate capabilities that most people couldn't imagine. It was exactly the kind of impossible mission she had trained for her entire adult life. Adaptable. The old model of overwhelming force and obvious presence wasn't always the best approach. Sarah opened her laptop and began researching Elena Vasquez's schedule, her company, her public statements, and appearances. If she was going to do this, she needed to understand not just the security challenges, but the person she would potentially be protecting. By midnight, she had made her decision. Tomorrow night, she would attend the leadership conference and observe Blackstone's operation firsthand. After that, she would decide whether to take Amanda's offer or continue looking for opportunities elsewhere. Either way, she was done letting other people's assumptions limit her possibilities. It was time to remind everyone, including herself, what she was truly capable of.